following lectures are from the archives of the Merton Center in Louisville. Given in the early 60s at Gethsemani, these talks were for the young men studying to be Trappist monks. They were recorded to be shared with the rest of the monks. This talk is unusual in that it contains much more dialogue than most. The Latin phrases you will hear were the monastic ritual of politeness and piety. The first speaker says, Benedicite, which means bless you. The response is Dominus, which means Lord or God. These talks end abruptly when the bell rings. Merton will say the Latin prayer, Adjutorium nostrum in nomine Domini, which means our help is in the name of the Lord. The students respond, Que fece caelum et terram, which means who made heaven and earth. The next voice you hear will be Thomas Merton's.
Today's gospel is really a beautiful gospel, so I want to read just a little bit of it. It's first St. John, and remember that your whole life is based on the gospel. You've come here to live the gospel. Your life is based on faith in these words, and when God speaks to you in the gospel, it's a very consoling thing. And this has to do with that. I'm just a little bit of the middle of the gospel here. My sheep listen to my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give them everlasting life, so that to all eternity they can never be lost. No one can tear them away from my hand. The trust which my Father has committed to me is more precious than all else. No one can tear them away from the hand of my Father. My Father and I are one. See, just think of that. This is the sort of thing that you want to be. Your whole life gets built on things like this. They're cornerstones of spirituality. The fact that we have been given to Christ by the Father, and no one can take him from, no one can take us by violence out of the hand of Christ. We belong to God in Christ. As you go through your life, these things sort of sink in more and more, and you begin to see that these are the important things, and that other considerations are pretty trivial. And you find you build your life on this, on these words of God. Well, continuing this little tract of St. Thomas on so-called on the ways of God. I don't know, maybe I'll finish it today. There's still a lot to go, but I mean, it's all the same pretty much as you go through. He just says the same sort of thing. There are things that you know. What's important about the tract, the real reason for studying it, and the thing that you have to emphasize is what? Well, why do you suppose it's important, Brother Dennis? What's the, not so much the content as the what? Thomas. Yeah, all right. Yeah, that's right. What I'm really emphasizing in all this is the spirit of the thing. Because, I mean, that's the things he says, that you've got to be good, you've got to live a good life, you've got to be charitable, and you've got to be reasonable, and all these things. This we know. See, you can say this over and over again. We know what we're supposed to do. But when it's said in a certain way, and the way that he says it here, whether it's said with a certain spirit, see, when he takes a certain approach, then it really opens up a deeper meaning to the thing. I mean, it leads in all sorts of directions, and it shows that our Christian life of virtue isn't just a Christian life of virtue in the sense of we acquire virtues and we do good things and it makes us good people and we're worthy of respect and that sort of thing. It really is a manifestation of God in the world through us. Then his whole way of dealing with God and God's attitude towards his creation is supposed to give us a whole view of creation that's totally different. See, what tends to be our view of creation? It tends to be a pagan view. Or use it, if it's there, use it. See, what you do what you want with it. It's there. You got power over it, so do anything you like with it. What's been the general atmosphere of this whole treatise here in its attitude towards creation? What's been the sort of general approach, Brother Dunstan? Notice. Oh, you know. Brother Gilmore.
I think it's going to show you that God is in creation.
Yeah.
And that you can approach God through.
Well, definitely that. That's certainly one of the things. God manifests himself in creation. But what else? What else?
God's infinite love for what he's
Yeah.
created and not corresponding respect for that.
That's right. See, all things are good because of God's love for them. See, the being and the reality of things manifest somehow God's love for them, God's care for them. And our goodness is a response to God's love as manifested in these things. Now, you see, that's a totally different sort of thing from just a pagan morality. Now, there's such a thing as a pagan morality which can be very good. And you do good, you avoid evil, because virtue is good and so forth. But things don't stack up to much. They're just there. I mean, they're running around, and you want to treat them right and so forth, use them properly. Don't waste the food in the refectory, don't waste the water in the grand parlor and that sort of stuff. Fine, don't waste it. But the point is that all these things are loved by God, and they're important in His sight. And the smallest creature is important in the sight of God, and means a great deal to Him. See, His heart is set on that small creature, even though it's just a blade of grass. It's important to Him. So therefore, nothing that's important to Him can be treated by us without great respect. And then what's most important to Him of all in creation is man. So that therefore, this whole treatise is filled with a deep respect for man and a deep sense of the value of man. What do you call that? When you've got a deep respect for the value of man and a deep sense of the goodness of man. There's a word, there's an ism that covers that. What's the ism that covers that particular approach? Well, that's humanism, see? Humanism. We hear a lot about that in the refectory in this Daniel Rope's book, but this is the good kind of humanism. There's a good humanism and there's a bad humanism. And Christian humanism is of the highest religious quality. It's a respect for man because God has made man in His image. See, this is the thing that runs all through this, that man is made in the image and likeness of God, and that therefore we should have this deep respect for man. You see, if you get something like this, what is this? This is theology, and it's philosophy. If you get something like this really into your system, it becomes very easy to be virtuous to some extent. I mean, nobody's going to be absolutely perfect in any respect, but if you see the truth, it's easy to conform to it. If you don't see the truth, and if you're just trying to force yourself to conform to some sort of an abstract norm by acts of will, you have an awful lot of trouble. Because to begin with, you don't quite know what you're conforming to. I will conform to what? I don't know, but I will. See. Whereas if you get the truth, if you have the truth in your mind and you see what you're trying to do, well, so that's what he does. He presents us then with the truth of God and God's love for creatures and God's way of dealing with creatures. Now here's another little passage that he starts out with here. Just a little. The last time he was saying that God exacts nothing of beyond anybody's strength. See, he doesn't demand, God doesn't make these tyrannical demands on people. He considers their limitations. Well, now today this is carrying on the same idea. Among the ways of God there is another perfection. He reproaches no one with their natural defects of body or of soul. See, natural defects. Because the person is not responsible for natural defects, such as blindness, deafness, deformity of the members, stupidity, lack of intelligence, of mind, of memory, of reason, and natural pusillanimity. For defects of this kind, God does not disdain and does not reject any man. See, well, that sounds very, sure, great, fine. Okay, but what do we do? See, and all the time we're getting mad at people because of things that they can't possibly help, and things which, when we get mad at them, they only get worse at. See, I mean, there's such a thing. Most of the things that we get mad at in people are what? They're purely traits of character. What are some of the standard ones? What's the main one you get when you're walking in line or anything like that? Give me an example. Community life. So the impatience you get with other people for what? Any example will do. Doesn't have to be the This should be about 5,000. Brother Dennis, give us one. You don't want to. All right, you don't want to involve anybody. Well, so one of the standard things is the tempo of the people. I mean, you're coming out of church, and you're all bowing in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and somebody stops right in front of you and bows, a proud, slow bow. Then you have to sort of stand there. There's a traffic jam piles up behind you, you see. Then you make a fast one, and then somebody gets mad at you for going too fast, and so forth. So, or tempo in choir. See, some want to sing fast, some want to sing slow. And some people, when the singing's fast, it bugs them terribly. And other people, when the singing's slow, it drives them absolutely crazy. That includes me. I mean, because some people find it difficult to pray when you're dragging along. And other people find it difficult to pray if they think you're hastening. See? Now, what is all this stuff? These are psychological traits and character traits and things that the people have got in them that they can't help. They've simply picked them up somewhere. And in community life, that's all you run into from morning to night. Now just think how silly it would be for a person to judge another person, just pick up 5 or 6 of these things and put them together, and you form an image of that person. 5 or 6 things that you don't like about him, and you start dealing with him as though you think he's a bad religious, and what's that guy doing around here, that sort of stuff. And he may be much more pleasing to God than you are. We've got to see it's most irrational to deal that way with people. And we shouldn't deal that way with people. You've got to see when you're dealing with people that way, you've got to be able to discount that. And you've got to be able to say, now look, this isn't reasonable. See? On the other hand, he says here that God does take certain things seriously. I mean, God doesn't overlook every fault, but there are different kinds of faults. He says there are things that you can help. There's things that we don't have to do, and then these things he does hold against. But he doesn't. But St. Thomas doesn't conclude that we should hold these things against everybody either. But he says certain things. To be sad at the progress of the just. See, this is a thing that offends God. To be sad at the progress. All right, now that in our life, how often don't we do that? See, somebody does something real good. He does a fine job of something. You say, oh. Yeah, but self-seeking. I mean, he's doing it for the applause, or he just thinks he's pretty good. He's doing it to please the abbot, or something like that. You see, and we sort of pull holes in it and tear it apart, and actually, it may be very pleasing to God. As he says later on in here somewhere, that it's very important that we should not only thank God for the gifts that He's given to us, but we should thank God for the gifts that He's given to other people. This is a very important thing to develop in community life. If you can rejoice when somebody else does something good and acts very virtuous and does something really well, and he happens to be somebody of whom you're a little envious, see? Well, this takes a lot of doing, and it's something you have to start working on now, because if you don't start at the beginning, you won't start acquiring it later on. In the beginning, you're ready to receive these, you're ready to develop in this way. Later on, you get fixed in a certain mold and you don't change. So that's why it's so important in the beginning to develop this kind of an outlook. See, it's much more important to develop these things than it is to develop a sort of a rigid, disciplinary kind of military routine. That so some people think that's perfection. Well, it's useful, it's helpful, it helps you to avoid a lot of the hard knocks and so forth, and you can get by with a lot less scars. But it isn't really perfection. And it doesn't really help you that much interiorly. Whereas if you have this ability to rejoice in the good of others, for example, it's a very great gift in our life. It's a big help. And it gets a lot of grace for you. Vilifying one's neighbor, lessening his good reputation, holding obstinately to one's own preferences. Now this again, you see, this is something that you got to look out for. And this is what we tend to do in all sorts of ways. I mean, just because I like it this way, then this is the way. This has got to be it, see? And holding obstinately, there's nothing wrong with having preferences. But where the trouble comes is when you hold on to your preferences against all comers. See, and nobody can shake you. I mean, this is the way it's got to be, and I want them to sing this way, and it's got to be this way, and no other, so forth. So let's pass on to another one. I think that covers that pretty well. Talks about opening our heart. He talks about the generosity of God, how God gives to each according to his capacity. And then the thing he concludes from that is a completely personal conclusion, which would, what do you say that would be? If it's going to be something personal for you, if you hear that God gives to everybody according to his capacity, what conclusion would you jump to after that, for the dentist? For yourself. So, no, this is for yourself now in relation to God. Well, open up the capacity. That's the thing that he emphasizes. So, which is a good point. It's a very good idea. You see, realizing that what we have to do in our spiritual life is largely a matter of emptying out the container, throwing out what fills it uselessly, so that our capacity for God is greater. Well, that's a way of looking at the spiritual life. That's a way of looking at asceticism, for example. That's a good, useful way of looking at asceticism, rather a positive way, rather than the negative way of just saying, well, now, these things are blemishes on my character, let's get rid of them so that I'll be without blemish. See, on the contrary, it's a question of throwing out things that are in the way of God and making room for Him. So he says this: the more the heart of man is dilated by love of God and of his neighbor, the more his meditations, his fervent prayers, his humility, and his generosity will have opened his soul to grace, the more elevated and greater is the grace that God will bestow on him, so forth. Now that's one measure that he gives. See? So he shows you that these are the ways of disposing yourself, of opening up your heart to receive grace. That's what meditation's for. Well, now, how is that going to help you in meditation? What about that? Do you think that idea that meditation is a way of disposing yourself to receive grace, do you think that's helpful for meditation, Brother Diego? How does that help? Or anybody? Brother, no.
I was saying, if and when the Holy Spirit was helping you do meditation, you'd be open to it.
That's right. That's right. Well, how do you think this will help a person to approach the whole question of meditation? Brother Nelson.
If you open yourself up to the Spirit,
Yeah.
well then He comes. And it's
That's right. That's right.
The work instead of you going to the.
That's right.
Pushing yourself into God.
That's right.
You sit back and
So this is a very important kind of attitude to have towards meditation. It's a useful attitude to have around here because in the beginning we tend to think that it all depends on us, see. It's my acts and how much I do, and if I once stop, I stop for 10 seconds, the words stop coming out. Oh, gee, something is the matter, you see. I haven't done anything for 2 minutes. See. Well, of course, I mean, don't start interpreting this to mean that it's, one just sits back and closes the eyes and enters into oblivion. I mean, sleep isn't meditation. But that it is important in meditation, though, to have this basic attitude of receiving. See, meditation is a time when you're going to receive. And so that if your attitude is receptive, it means to say that you are not filling the place with noise and not filling the place with acts. You are relaxing in the right sense of the word, and you are listening. And you are ready to cooperate. But then what you should do, you should also go along if God asks you something. Now, how does God ask you these things? How does God speak? Does God speak to people in meditation? Is this true, or is this just some kind of do we believe this? Should we believe that God speaks to us in meditation? Let's put it that way. Anybody who wants to discuss that? Should we believe that God speaks to us in meditation? Brother Sean. The Bible is God's Word. Okay, well, you're evading the issue to some extent. You've got the Bible there, you're safe. See, if you use the Bible for meditation, that's true. But still, God has to speak to us personally. Does He speak to us personally in meditation? And if so, how? That's true with the Bible. I mean, perhaps all you need to do is just build on that a bit. So give us some more.
God is the source of everything.
Yeah.
Our own things that the forces in ourselves, they're all springs from God.
Yeah.
So what would attract us?
That's true. You're on the right track. See, in other words, reasonable and legitimate attractions and interests in the spiritual life can be taken to be inspirations of grace, see, or even just natural movements of God. We're talking in the realm of grace now. For example, if you go to meditate, and you're doing a reasonably good job of meditating in this particular way, so you kneel down and you ask for the help of the Holy Spirit, and seriously, and then you kind of open your heart to God, and you sort of listen, and you make an act of faith, and you believe in His presence, you believe that He's acting in you, and so forth. And then, all right, it gets a little foggy for a bit, see, which is normal. And it doesn't mean that you immediately hear a loud voice saying, go forth and preach to the heathens, or something like that. If you hear that, well, you'll probably not the voice of God around here. So, but all of a sudden it occurs to you, well, I ought to be more humble, see, and I'm fighting too much with the brethren, and so forth, see, and this comes through, see. Well, you can say that that's God talking to you. I mean, there's every reason to believe that this comes from God, if, as it happens, you look and say, yeah, that's true, I am, aren't I, a little bit, so forth. And if you see that this is the case, and there's every reason to think that this is the voice of God because it's something that you should do, something that grace would demand. Well, I mean, just one thought like that during meditation, and the response on your part to say, well, okay, that's right. See, I admit that, and then you say, well, now please give me the grace to try and do better on this. See, if that's all you've done in a half hour, you've made a very good meditation. See, would that we could do that much every day, or then not that you have to do that much, but would that much would happen. See. But it doesn't have to happen that way. It can be much more obscure than that. Yes, brother?
What happens if that's the worst one?
How do you tell? It could be a distraction, could be the voice of God. Usually it's a distraction. See, how can you tell? That's right. Because we should all be praying for Brother Diego to get real good inspiration of the Holy Ghost. so I mean, don't utterly dismiss all thoughts. So maybe the Holy Ghost might want you to if you hear a little voice saying today chicken or something, unless it's Friday. Actually, how can you tell the difference between these things? You have to know by experience, you see. Now, usually your thoughts of your job, what are they? They're purely automatic images that keep coming back in because your mind usually has to think about your job. And so when you stop thinking about your job and you start dealing with God, you deal with someone whom you don't see, for whom you don't have any images. And so there got to be images from somewhere because your imagination's always working, so it goes back to the last bunch of images that it was dealing with, namely the work. See? And then it all starts coming through. Well, most of the time, this is purely mechanical distraction. But it could be, though, you could tell. If God did want you to know something about the way you're working, you see, you could say, now you're throwing yourself like a madman into that work. See? Maybe you're trying to do too much all at once. See? That could come in meditation. But how would you know? How could you say that this was a grace, Brother Lyon? That's right. You see this truth, though, I would say on a sort of a deeper level. The ordinary distraction is, so to speak, up here. See, I mean, it's kind of just it isn't localized, but you can say it's sort of on the top of your head. It's superficial. Whereas a real grace, it comes down in the depths of your heart. It's something that seems to be pretty central and pretty fundamental, and it involves your deepest self. However, one more thing is necessary. What? I mean, to make sure that this is a grace. Yes. You've got to check with somebody. Check with your director. See, I mean, until you get to know the ropes, because you can get some very strong impulsions down deep, and say, oh boy, that was a deep one. that must be pretty good. See, so, but it may not necessarily be so. So you have to come along and you have to check, and that's what direction's for. See, that's one of the chief purposes of direction, is to make sure that the ideas you get are going in the right direction, and that you are really conforming to grace and not simply to your nature or to some other source, because we've got plenty of sources of inspirations. See? There are all kinds of inspirations coming to us from all sources. See? So we have to make sure, we have to learn how to respond to the grace of God. So therefore, this question of opening our hearts to God is a very important one. Then when he gives these gifts, what does he ask in return? Of course, one of the best dispositions, he doesn't say it exactly here, but it comes up in the next chapter implicitly, one of the best ways of opening your hearts to grace is what? What is one of the, absolutely, this is sort of Christian tradition, you run into it in the Missal and so forth, yes. Gratitude, see. If you have a grateful heart, and if you are habitually grateful, then again, it's of great value to you. It's tremendously useful. And there's nothing better you can do around here than to cultivate a spirit of gratitude, a spirit of gratefulness for even small things. You see, these are, again, as I was saying, these are things that will really help you in the monastic life. If you have a habit of being grateful, if on the other hand you do what St. Benedict just doesn't like, see, you're all the time griping about everything. Well, this is, yeah, well, that's all right, but I mean, it could have been a whole lot better. Finding fault with everything, it blocks everything up. It closes up your heart. Grace doesn't come in. Whereas if you're grateful, it's a great help. And then the spirit of praise, he says, is very important. That if you're, of course, that's what we're inquire for, if we have this spirit of praising God for his goodness. And then finally, one other thing he adds is this idea that if you use the gifts that you receive to help other people, it's also a great help to you. See? It means much more to you. So therefore, it's very important then that we should try to, even if it's only in an interior sort of way, you may not be able to go up and tell these other people something, but it may be just interiorly. But if you use the graces that God gives you in order to desire the good of others and to help them as best you can, well, then that helps you too. We've got one final chapter, at least it's not final, but it's final for today. Pretty much in the same sort of spirit that we've been talking about. It's this idea of God's care for his creatures, see, and how God loves every possible kind of creature, and how he loves man especially, and all the things that God does in order to safeguard the good of man. See? Well, now we'd say, naturally, we could think of a few things that God does to safeguard the good of man. He sends them food and clothing and so forth. But St. Thomas runs all the way down the line, all sorts of things that he brings in there. He lists all kinds of ways in which God has care for his creatures, and then, as usual, works it around the other way and says that we have to do the same thing in return. And this gets you into some curious effects, because where he says, for example, he says God gives angels to take care of man. See, this isn't what we usually think of. And the last thing in the world that we would think of is an angel, but still, this is tradition, and this is Catholic theology. God gives us angels to take care of us, see. And therefore, along the line somewhere, St. Thomas says we should be somehow concerned for the angels. Well, this is very strange, isn't it? This isn't modern at all. See, this is definitely 13th century. But it fits right into this whole picture of the universe as a whole, in which the loving wisdom of God unites all these beings in a hierarchical system where everybody is concerned with everybody else. And not only are men concerned with turnips and so forth, but they're also concerned with angels. Angels are concerned with men, and men are concerned with angels. What can you do for an angel? Just in case you don't know, Brother Dunstan.
One thing you would be grateful for.
You could be grateful to your angel, definitely. If you've had a course in St. Thomas, you find how this fits in very beautifully. The angel has a very definite responsibility towards us, and we have a very definite responsibility towards him. Because the angel, my guardian angel and I, are involved we're kind of a team. See? And if this team in any way happens to be broken up, the angel is the loser as well as me. See, I am part of this angel's reward, strange as it may seem. See? And one of the things that is very important to this angel is that I should be with him in heaven, because this is his job. And if he has to spend the rest of eternity and I'm not there to share it with him, it will be in a certain way that his job somehow failed. See? So, I mean, he won't necessarily lose anything essential, but let's hope he won't lose anything at all. See, but we should be there with our angel in heaven because we're part of his reward. And we should not defraud him of this reward, so that we should seek our salvation not only for ourselves, but for the sake of our guardian angel and for all the other people who've worked together with us for our salvation. The purpose of this is not just to bring in some quaint medieval mythology. This is a vision of the universe, see, and it's a very Christian vision of the universe. A vision in which everything is interrelated, and in which people have in which all creatures have responsibilities to one another. It's a very beautiful vision. It's a very contemplative vision of the universe, and I think it should mean a great deal to us. And he says, after all, we should even have great care for God. See, God has care for us, well, we should care for him. Because that's mutual too. See? In a certain sense, God needs us. Not because he has to, not because we're essential to him, but because he deigns to need us, you see. He has willed to need us. And what does he need us for? Well, he needs us to do his will. I mean, he could get along without us, all right, there's no question of that. But the fact that he has willed that we should participate in the work of this creation, and that we should be in it with him, means that he is very interested in everything that we do, and that there's a great deal at stake in what we do. So that even in the smallest things, if we neglect to do the will of God, he is, in a certain sense, not essentially, not really, but in a way, he is a loser, see. He is being deprived of something that we could give him. As I say again, the important thing here is the spirit in which this is conceived, see. This is a certain way of looking at the universe. And the spirit is essentially a spirit of love. And that's what's essentially Christian about it. See, this is the way you make everything an act of love. And this is the way the universe becomes a universe of love, in which love is important. And that, again, I think is why we have to be interested in this as monks, because this is right up our alley. Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
This concludes this lecture by Thomas Merton. For the next one, please fast forward this cassette to the end and then turn it over.
There's been a big series of articles on this Eichmann trial that I told you about, and it'll probably come out in book form sometime, in which case we'll try and get the book. But man, it's a shocking thing. It's really terrific. See, the thing that's shocking about it is that you think, naturally, you tend to think that this Eichmann, well, what was he? He must have been a sort of an incarnate devil or something. The trouble was he wasn't. See, the thing that's most shocking about it is he was just an ordinary person. He's just like an ordinary businessman or something like that, and he was conducting this whole operation just the way you'd conduct a business. And the thing is that it isn't just this one man, but everybody was in it. It's this whole question of the Nazis exterminating the Jews. I mean, they exterminated their own Jews, and then they went into these other countries, and people in these other countries collaborated right along with them. Sure, you can have our Jews too. They just take them. Of course, there were differences in their approach. Some countries were glad to give them back the German Jews, but they'd want to keep their own. France would let them have the German Jews, but they were going to keep our own Jews, that sort of stuff. And only one country really resisted at all, and that was Denmark. And Denmark did a beautiful job. I mean, they just said, well, no, we're just not going to cooperate with this at all, see? And Hitler said, well, we want you guys to give the Jews yellow stars. And so the Danes said, well, all right, the first one to wear the yellow star will be the King of Denmark. And then, so they said, all right, okay. And then they said, well, we want you to start this. And so the Danish government said, all right, then we resigned. And they happened to want them to have them there to make it look good, so they didn't push that anymore. And then the Danes just simply refused cooperation all down the line, and they got away with it. And only about 48 Danish Jews finally died in concentration camps. But the great question in this Eichmann thing is, the question that the writer of this article asks is, when did his conscience begin to bother him, or when did it rather stop bothering him? So you can remember what he had to do. He had to ship all these people to these concentration camps. Well, when he first started out with this thing, he had a good idea. He said, let's ship them just out of the country to some other place where they won't be in a. He wanted to ship them to Madagascar, and then he wanted to ship them to, had a few ideas of places to ship all these people. Didn't work too well. And then he got out to Russia, and he saw what was going on. Well, you see what happened was, remember, they had two kinds of operations going on. One, they had these guys going along after the German army that went into Russia, and these were called Einsatzgruppen. And what they did, they traveled behind the army and just wiped out everybody. See, that's everybody they didn't like, or everybody they couldn't use for forced labor. They just simply shot them in thousands. See, not tens or 20s. They simply get a bulldozer and dig a big ditch and line them up on the ditch and shoot them, and then line up some more and shoot them, and they just fall in, and then they just come back with a bulldozer and bury them. And so Eichmann goes out to Russia, and he sees what they're doing, see. And he says, well, this is most unpleasant. I don't like this. And he nearly faints and all that sort of stuff. And he goes back and he says, gee, this isn't a nice job that I'm doing. See, I'm getting mixed up in this sort of thing. So he made a couple of efforts to ship them to different places so they wouldn't get into that. But it didn't work, see. I mean, then one time he was told to ship them out to Russia where they'd all be shot. And he ships them instead to a place in Poland where they wouldn't be shot. And the fellow in charge of the place in Poland immediately reports him to the big boss, who was Himmler, and says, what's the matter with this guy Eichmann? He's lousing up the whole organization. So he saw that what had happened was he was going to get in trouble if he didn't obey orders. So he just, finally, he just conformed, and then just shipped him to these concentration camps. People asked him, well, why did you do this, and didn't your conscience bother you? And he says, oh, well, who was I to judge? See, all these other people, these are responsible people, they've made decisions. Who was I to judge? Who was I to disobey them, you know? There's no answer. Then he says, nobody told me. So nobody ever reproached me, said this was wrong. Well, of course, it's true. If somebody had walked into him, see, walked in to Eichmann and said, what you are doing is horrible, and you are, wake up or you'll go to hell, or something like that, see. Well, at least he would have been told. But you see, this is the problem of the modern age. This isn't just a horror story. This is the sickness of the modern world. And the sickness of the modern world is absence of conscience, the total deadening of conscience, so that conscience doesn't tell people that to stop when they're doing something that they absolutely is a crime against God. And this is, on an enormous scale. And the lack of private conscience, what the lack of private conscience comes from is a lack of public conscience. And where you see the lack of public conscience is in things like newspapers and radio and TV and so forth. They just simply state these things. They just say them, and then people say, well, if it happens, it must be all right. See, it gets down to the level of the average person who says, well, who am I to judge? This is the sort of thing that goes on. Maybe it's right. I don't know. Who am I to say? So therefore, when it comes down to us, we've got to have a conscience. And our conscience shouldn't be reduced to a question of, to relatively trivial questions around the monastery. See, it should be a real conscience about good and evil. And of course, this is a big problem. But anyway, so as I say, the question of formation is the whole problem of formation is a problem of formation of conscience. See, that's our whole job. Is to keep our conscience awake and to keep it responsive to God's will and responsive to God's grace, so that there are people in the world who apprehend the truth and, if necessary, say it or express it in their lives or something. See, this is what we have to do, and so hence the value of this book of St. Thomas here that we're talking about how the Christian has to reproduce in his life the qualities that are found in God. We've got to be sons of God, and so we get back to this basic thing. And you see, the modern world doesn't have these qualities. The modern world is oriented in a different direction. It's not concerned with the things that you find in this particular book here. It's concerned with other things. And so therefore it's very important for us to have this kind of morality and this kind of conscience. So, and it isn't so much what you say. It's how you say it. And it's see, anybody can get up and say, you got to be right and you mustn't be wrong. See, and you've got to support truth and you've got to hate falsity. Hitler was saying that. Hitler was saying you've got to love good and hate evil. See? And he was saying it very forcefully. We've got to love good to the point of exterminating everybody who's evil. See? What's wrong with his message is above all the implications. It's the idea that one has a sort of a divine autonomy, and he can decide what's good and what's evil. See, you make up your mind what's good, you make that up for yourself, you see, and what you say is good is good. It has no objective reference, but there are objective references. So, and all through here you got an entirely different perspective. You've got the perspective of mercy, the perspective of love, the perspective of respect for life. See, that's exactly what these people lacked. It was a total disregard of life. And even at the end of the war, one of the things that came out in these articles again, is at the end of the war, people in Germany were going around saying, well, of course we've been beaten, but the Fuhrer won't let him take us over. He's going to gas us all. See, and this was put out as something. This was put out as something good. You see, the Fuhrer has provided everything. He will gas us all in the end, and this will be a good thing. This is the way people were thinking. And of course, just to make the thing a little bit more actual, but an awful lot of people who were engaged in this stuff are working and living in Germany today. I'm not saying that revenge has to be taken on them and so forth, but they have responsible positions, and they're functioning, and they're living in the German society, and they're playing an important part in it still. So it's a big thing. So, what does St. Thomas say? To get a completely different perspective of this. Here he's talking about real goodness, and about the goodness of God, and about the generosity of God, and the way God behaves towards his creatures. And you've got an axiom in philosophy, which tells you a great deal about God, actually. It says, the good, the axiom says in Latin, bonum est diffusivum sui, which means in English, the good gives itself. It is of the nature of a supreme good to simply give itself without limit. See, God gives himself without limit. And he gives, St. Thomas says here, let's see, he communicates to creatures all the good that in its essence is communicable and that they have the capacity to receive. And continuously, and I would say probably immediately, and this immediately as soon as they allow him to give, even though he sees that his gifts do not fructify in them. See, so he gives to his creatures all that is communicable, all that they can receive, all they're capable of receiving, and as soon as they're open to receive it, he communicates it to them. And he doesn't demand that it bear fruit immediately. See, he wants it to bear fruit, but he doesn't insist that it bear fruit right away. And then he gives a whole list of examples of this. But what's the greatest good that God has given to creatures? Let us. And how? In the mystery of what?
The mystery of redemption.
Well, before that. You couldn't have had the redemption unless you'd had what, Brother Isaac? The incarnation. See, in the incarnation, with including the redemption, this is something to think about. This is the supreme manifestation of the liberality of God. See, of God. This carries this out. All that in its essence is communicable. He communicates himself. See, the most that can be communicated is infinite. It's God himself. He communicates himself to his creatures by becoming part of his creation in the incarnation. And all that we have the capacity to receive is given to us in the incarnation. For this, you have to really understand the theology of the incarnation, of the union of the human nature and the divine nature in one person. Because you see, each one of us has a human nature, and our human nature is united to God in Christ. See, you have a human nature, I have a human nature, and so forth. We all have human nature in a general sense, and we have individual human natures. Well, our human natures, by virtue of the incarnation, belong to God. They are his, but there's only one hitch. See? They're not absolutely, totally his. There is something that can stand in the way of that, and what's that? Well, we can. It is up to our choice. You see, it is a matter of whether or not we surrender our human nature to him. It is whether we want our human nature to belong to him or not. We can say yes or no. See, but it is capable of belonging to him, and it is, in fact, by right, it's his. He has acquired a right to the human nature of each one of us. To our humanity, he has a right to it, see, not only by creation, but by his incarnation and by the redemption. But we have the power to refuse him to exercise that right fully. But he can, but you see this, even, you look at it the other way, even though we give him all that we have and all that we are, what does that really mean? Who's giving who? Are we giving? All we're doing is we're just giving him. We're opening the way for him to give us all that he wants to give us. If you carry it to the limit, all that we can give God really is freedom to operate in us. And that's what he really wants of us. He wants freedom to work in us. He wants a free hand. And so what we should try to do with all our heart is to simply to give him a free hand, to open the way so that he can communicate to us all the good that he wants to communicate to us. That's all he wants to do. He simply wants to give goodness to us. Well, then of course you know how he goes. He always says, this is what God does and this is what we ought to do. Now this is beautiful. And it's exactly the opposite of what we were hearing about at the beginning of the talk here. And we, not only should we make a mutual gift of our eyes that they may see for others, of our ears that hear penitence, of our mouth that it be ready to preach and to counsel, of our feet that they may be the servants of our neighbor, and of our heart that it may meditate his salvation. Actually, there's a better translation than that. And also that all that we possess of spiritual or temporal goods, all that we can do outwardly by our works, inwardly by our desires, all that we are in body and soul, we should give generously to each of those who are in purgatory and to those who are now alive and who soon will be gone in purgatory, in order that the will of God may be accomplished in them now and always. Here you've got the mind of this man, and see how he goes step by step, right down the line till he's in one paragraph. So you said everything. See, this covers the whole works. Just see how much he says there. See, God having communicated all the goodness that he can communicate to his creatures, we have to communicate with one another all the gifts that we have. So that, and then he takes the most obvious natural gifts. And it's a beautiful little meditation. Anything that we have, any good that we have, is for others as well as for ourselves. See, it's not only for ourselves. So that any capacity that we have is for the use of others as well as for ourselves, and we should use these things for others as well as for ourselves. Now, of course, this is very important in our life, not only in the fact that it's a community life, but when you think, what gifts do we have that we have to use for the whole world? See, we of course, we all, the examples here like eyes and so forth. Well, what do we do? Well, what about our mouth? See, what are we supposed to do with that for the whole world? Anybody? Well, the Finbar. We're supposed to praise God, you see. And so we have special gifts that go with our vocation. We have a kind of spiritual sight that others don't have, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And we may not feel that way most of the time, but we do. I mean, God has given us a knowledge of himself which he hasn't given to other people, because otherwise we wouldn't even be in the monastery. Well, now, if he has given us that vision of himself, he's given us that awareness of himself, he's given us that recognition in our hearts, that isn't just for us. We're supposed to do we're supposed to respond to God in this way precisely because other people don't and can't. See? We've been selected to do this for the other people who can't do it and who never will do it, because they'll never be able to do it till they get to heaven. So this is our job. I mean, it's just the idea of the mystical body that you get in St. Paul. Everybody has a function, see. And our two chief functions for the world, well, three if you like. First of all, to thank God, because we see what we are supposed to thank him for. They don't. Most people outside, although they vaguely, and most of them maybe have some vague belief in God, maybe no belief at all, but they don't see, as we should see, how much God has done for them and for us. See, we see that. And it's being put before us every day. I mean, we've got it in the scriptures, we've got it in the Mass, we've got it in the liturgy, we've got it in the Psalms, and so forth. All day long, the goodness of God is before us. And we're aware of this, and we're seeing this. And we owe it to the world to keep this faculty of spiritual vision awake and alert. Your spiritual reading and your study of the scriptures and your study of the Psalms, that isn't just something you're doing for yourself. That's a debt you owe to the world. It's a debt I owe to the world. See, we have to train ourselves. We have a special obligation with regard to other people to train ourselves to see the things of God. And if we're in the monastery and we're not trying to see the things of God, I mean, obviously we can't. Sometimes we get in an awful cloud and we can't see anything, but that's part of the thing too. But we should be oriented in that direction because we owe it to the rest of the world, and we owe it especially to the people that are closest to us. We owe it to our friends, and our families, and the people that we've run into in life. All the people, I often think of this, that I think of all the people that I've ever run into in different ways and means and places and so forth. And there was a purpose to all that. See, nobody here has ever met anybody that didn't have some reference to what would happen when you were here. You run into some bird someplace, you're talking, and you just have a conversation with some guy on a bus or something. See? And you just, you meet him and you say goodbye. You never see him again. But maybe God wanted you to pray for him. See? And maybe you were the only person that would pray for him. Maybe God just made sure that he would have somebody praying for him in a monastery. And then maybe all sorts of funny things may have happened to these people that we've met, who sort of vanished out of sight and we never see again. Sometimes they pop up in your mind. It's funny how some of these people come back. People you haven't thought of for years, and all of a sudden, bing, it pops right up. Maybe, who knows, maybe he needs your prayers real bad at that moment. Why does the Lord bring him back to your mind? You don't know. It's always good to pray for somebody. You don't just say, oh, it's a distraction. He's ruining my meditation. Well, pray for him. Maybe he needs prayers. And then he says a very beautiful thing here. Our heart is given us, and the translation here is that it may meditate his salvation, but in the Latin it's different. He has given us a heart to meditate for the salvation of others. See? Our meditations aren't just for ourselves. We're meditating for other people, too. See? We're doing the job of meditating that they can't do. Perhaps they're lucky that they don't have to do some of the meditating that we try to do that doesn't work so well. But we are meditating for them, see? And it's with our heart that we're meditating for them. Our heart belongs to everybody. Our heart doesn't just belong to ourselves. We're not just there meditating for our own satisfaction. And we have, again, an obligation to try to meditate. Not in some fancy, fantastic sort of a way, but really to love God in our meditation. See, what's the purpose of meditation? Just to get in contact with God and to establish a union of love with him. And that love begets light and truth and so forth and reality, and it gets us rooted in reality. So that we, at the end of a meditation, we should, in a certain sense, have more being than we had at the beginning. We should be more real at the end than we were when we started. Sometimes it's the other way around, but anyway, that's the way it should be. See, we should be real. We should be getting our teeth into reality. But I mean, this is a matter of faith, not a matter of feeling. See, I mean, you can't just come through the end of the morning meditation already to feeling that you're on top of the world. Maybe you're not, but you've got to believe that God will do this for you. So much for that one. And then he's got this next point he takes here is about, well, let's just skip this and go on to another one, because this next one is something we practically took care of last time, about his forgiveness and how completely he forgets sins. See, how completely he forgives and how completely he forgets the sins of the world. And just, I mean, they're gone, they're finished. See, whereas we, as usually, he balances things, we forgive, but we don't forget. See, we're willing to overlook the thing. But he says, what does he say? It's quite interesting. It happens that we do forgive, we almost never forget. We rejoice in the embarrassment of our debtor. We have small pity for him in adversity, or else we love him less than we did before. See, this is the hard saying. When you forgive somebody, you're supposed to love him as you did before. That sometimes is pretty hard. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that anybody can really absolutely demand that a person not feel differently to where if somebody's really hurt you bad, it's awful hard not to feel differently towards them. I mean, but it's a question of feeling there. You have to make that distinction, because when the feeling is affected, it's not according to your will. You can't control the feeling. You may feel differently towards somebody, but you should certainly try to love him just as much as before, and try to sort of overlook the feelings so that they will heal as quickly as possible. And if you look at it from a religious point of view, what would be the religious way of looking at this thing? I mean, so somebody has hurt me, a friend has hurt me, and I don't feel the same towards him as before. What can I do about this? Well, let's just avoid each other from now on, huh? What's the religious answer to that? What would be the way of faith in looking at this thing? Anybody? Live and laugh. All right. What does it say? Love your enemy. So now he's an enemy. Well, that's true. But what could your brother? All right. Yeah. No. 70 times 7. Sure. You should forgive. Well, this is shows how often you should continue to forgive him. Therefore, you should understand that this doesn't make any difference, and no matter how often he does something like this. Of course, you see, the thing is, when you're hurt, what happens is you set up a defense, see, and you say, never, I won't give him another chance to do that. Well, now there you have to distinguish, see. If ordinary Christian charity means that I have to put myself in a position where he does have a chance to do that again, then I have to do it, see. I mean, I have to run that risk. See, I must not withdraw from the situation where I might be hurt if charity demands that I be in that situation. What do you think, Brother Diego? Well, that's true. But that's very true. But I would say in this particular situation, you'd have to be pretty slow to judge that this is the time. Yeah, I'm going to help him. He needs to get a little merit. Well, the way I would say is this. What we should do in a situation where we've been hurt like that, first of all, these situations are always very mysterious, see. Nobody understands what's behind the whole thing, see. To what extent was it my fault, see? I don't know. To what extent was it his fault? I don't know. So the first thing you say is we're both at fault, see. And insofar as I am at fault, I'll try to learn from this. See, this has something to teach me about my own way of acting with you, because you see, we've all got all sorts of little ways of acting with people that we're not aware of, and we may be hurting people without realizing it. See, we may be stepping on their feet when we think that we're being very nice to them, and so very often God allows a bust-up to arise so that a person will rise up and pay attention. See, hey, maybe I did something wrong too. See, maybe I hurt him first without realizing it. Then the second thing is that if God allows these things to happen, it's in order to purify and supernaturalize the love on both sides. And so even though the feelings may be wounded, it may be a way of preparing the way for a really deeper charity. See, a really something below the surface level. Because it's not too good just to have our love for God or for our brother just on the level of feeling. Because feeling is deceptive, see. And very often it's really necessary for friendships to be really broken up and ground around a bit so that they're purified, so they get on a deeper level. And so it isn't just a question of brother so-and-so and me were real buddies, and anytime anybody's mad at me, I can go to him and he'll console me, and when the superior lands on him, he can come to me and I'll console him. So well, that may be a very superficial kind of friendship. And so maybe it needs to be purified, and that's what happens in a community life. I mean, there's a lot of wounding goes on, and this wounding shouldn't be the kind of stuff that said, all right, okay, he's across him off the list now. So you go through you go through your religious life, and the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. See? And finally, you're reduced to making friends with the newest pastor that comes in. You'll have somebody that has no reference to present company. But it gets to the point where people have nothing to do with their contemporaries in the religious life. All they can do is have something to do with somebody who's never had to deal with them much before. So this is the thing we have to look at. This could be a very supernaturalizing thing. Then he goes on to talk about the mercy of God. Again, a special aspect of the mercy of God. He exacts nothing that is beyond anybody's strength. See, this is the reverse of these other things. He gives to the limit of the capacity of the creature to receive, but he's very limited in his demands. See, he respects the limitations of the creature, and what he says is, he exacts nothing that is beyond our strength in fasting, prayers, watching, almsgiving, bodily mortifications, and regular discipline. See, well, in other words, that he's content with what a person can do. And of course, the essentials in all these things are relatively easy. See, the real essential, for example, in penance. We got this beautiful talk. That talk of the Holy Father on penance was terrific the other day. See, the essentials of penance are in the heart. And what God asks of everybody is that they should have penance in their heart, and that they should have a real change of heart, and they should be really sorry for any evil that's in their life, and really wanting... What is the real essence of penance? What's the real, interior penance, as manifested by exterior? What's the real essence of penance, Brother Sean? Well, what's the real essence of sin? Yeah. Well, it's a complete reversal of sin. So if you take what sin is and then turn it around, you've got what penance is. So what's sin? What's the essence of sin? Yeah, a complete, what? A turning away from God. See? So penance is a complete turning to God. See, sin is the turning away from God to the creature. So penance is a turning away from the creature to God. A complete turning to God. So what penance is then is a total reorientation so that you're back looking straight at God and desiring nothing but Him. That's penance. And then where the works of penance come in, they come in insofar as they manifest that, and insofar as they help you to do that, see. So, all right, insofar as that I've sinned by gluttony, then by fasting I show that I've renounced attachment to food and turned back to God. And insofar as I sin by in the flesh, why, if I'm mortified with my flesh and so forth, that shows that I'm turning back to God. And insofar where the real penance with us comes is in this business of things that have to do with humility and things that have to do with patience and turning away from attachment to ourself. There's our real penance. There's where the penance really is important for us. But there, we can all do that in our heart. The great example of this fact that God takes whatever the person has to give, even though it may be very little, and gives a great reward in exchange, is the good thief. I think he mentions that in here. See, well, what could the good thief do? There wasn't anything he could do except in his heart. See? He was completely limited in every possible respect. He couldn't go any place. He couldn't carry out any works of mercy. He didn't have to fast. And, he was... everything was included in this, but only, you see, you had these two thieves, both undergoing the same thing. And it was asked of them that they should do what they could, and the only thing they could do was interior. See? The only thing they could change was their heart. They couldn't change their position, they couldn't change their anything else. And one changed his heart and the other one didn't. And the penance of the good thief was absolutely perfect. See? It was perfect penance. It was the whole works. And as a result of his penance, what did his penance consist in? It consisted in looking at our Lord on the cross and seeing that this was the Son of God and saying, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And then as a result of this was his act of penance. This was perfect penance. It covered everything. And as a result of this, our Lord said, this day thou shalt be with me in paradise. And so it means that that's Reverend Father often says in chapter when he comments on this, that our Lord canonized him. See, He became a saint in 5 seconds or 10 seconds. See? You know, his penance was so perfect that he became from a criminal a saint in a split second like that. So that's the meaning of penance. Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
This concludes this presentation of lectures by Thomas Merton. It has been brought to you by Credence Cassettes, a service of the National Catholic Reporter Publishing Company, P.O. Box 419491, Kansas City, Missouri 64141. All audio rights are reserved by National Catholic Reporter. For more information concerning cassettes by Thomas Merton or to receive a free Credence cassette catalog, please call toll-free 1-800-333-7373 between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. Central Time.